Hey guys, welcome back into Legacy. So I'm gonna hit a video today that I've been talking about this with a couple of different people over the last week or so. Just want to talk about it again on this channel, and that is using descriptors in combat, using descriptors in general, but mostly in combat, to liven up your game and bring your game to life and kind of bring everything to what you're wanting it to be when you play D&D versus kind of the mundane, boring combat where it's just talking about the mechanics. And I'm going to explain kind of what I'm thinking here, and then I'm going to go into why I think this is important. Um, but this kind of comes out of an article that was written in I believe it was Kobold's Guide to Game Design. It's been a while since I read the article, and it really changed my dynamics on how I saw combat itself, how I saw describing things. My games really took on a different life when I started understanding what they were talking about. And I really hope that you guys will as well. Again, guys, anything I say in this video, you don't have to do it. You don't have to do it the way I do it at all. It's very much designed so that you can play a game the way you want to play it, the way you envision playing it, versus just putting it out there as a golden rule kind of thing. Oh, you have to do this kind of thing. This is really designed to help you become a better game master. That's the goal, not just being a game master because anybody can learn how to game master. Learning how to really make game worlds pop and learning how to make the game more exciting for the players and more tangible for the players is actually a really, really, really big part of GMing. So this is kind of what I'm thinking here, guys, and this is where it starts. A lot of people who run games like D&D, run different RPGs. They describe things very mechanically in combat. They describe things very mechanically in general. They just kind of basically describe things, and in combat, it's really bad because what you'll get is you get a lot of people. Oh, that guy hits you for 3 points of damage. Well, that's great because it conveys the information, but it doesn't really convey the idea behind what's happening in combat. It doesn't convey the give and take, the wounds, the sword thrust, the way that weapons are used. It doesn't convey the information that the players, so the players can kind of envision what's really happening in combat. They may see it on a tabletop even when you're using minis and stuff, but they don't really envision what the combat feels like, what it smells like, what your player characters are going through, what the thought process is. And this kind of stuff can actually even change the way that your players interact with combat if you do it right. So what I normally will do is I try to describe the combat in very descriptive, very clean terms. Um, and by that I mean you will see a difference when you do this if you do it right, because what will happen is the players will then begin interacting with the combat situation a lot different. Um, so what I typically do is I will do something like, instead of, oh, you take 3 points of damage, I will go in and I will describe the sword thrust stabbing you in the shoulder, grazing your arm, getting under your armor, the laser blast burning your arm, something like that. And then what will happen is I will then say, okay, and when that happens, you take 3 points of damage. You take 4 points of damage, whatever. Depending on the game I'm playing, of course, because you're going to describe things differently based on settings and all that. So what you do is when you describe things that way, your players kind of get a better feel for what's actually happening in combat. The goblin doesn't just stab them for 3 points of damage. The goblin slips under their guard and stabs them in the shoulder, and now they have a burning, a small wound on their shoulder. The gunslinger shoots them in the leg, and they have a little bit of blood trickling down their leg, and their leg feels weak. You know, a piece of their armor, their armor strap gets cut, and now it's loose. Um, you're describing the actual events. And what's going to happen is your characters are now going to take that combat a little more seriously. They're going to start using the environment maybe a little differently. They're going to feel the world a little better because now it's no longer an abstract of looking at your character sheet and say, oh, well, it's only 3 points and I have 50 hit points. Okay, well, I don't need to worry about it. Um, because when you see things just mechanically, you play the game mechanically and you play your character sheet, not your character. A character that gets wounded, even if he has 50 hit points, may think differently about assaulting somebody if he knows he's going to get hurt. Your character sees somebody get shot in the open, may dive behind cover all of a sudden. Things like that are going to change as you play through and actually do those things. And that's how you should be describing. And combat can be very dynamic when you do that because you're not just telling the players information. You're giving them a living world. You're giving them, the idea that their character is in danger. Their character has something going on. You know, uh, if you're playing Deadlands and somebody shoots you with a scatter gun, it doesn't just hit you; it blows off a piece of your arm. You know, your bicep is now a bloody mess, and your left arm is basically useless. You know, go into a game like Traveler. We are just talking to somebody about this. Say somebody gets killed next to you, you're close enough, and they're killed next to you with a laser gun. Describe what it smells like when they hit the ground. You smell burning ozone and burning flesh as they drop and stop moving. That is going to bring a whole new reality to those characters. They're not just going to be like, oh my god, oh, somebody's dead. Oh, you got to roll a new character up. No, because now the character is saying, holy crap, that guy next to me is dead. And it stinks and it's awful. You really need to bring that to life, and you should pop out the descriptors, and you should give a better idea for what's going on with your characters and how your characters are envisioning things and how your characters are imagining things happening. If you're doing that, your characters are going to get a lot better view of the world. Um, in general, they're going to get a lot better view of the world. And that can go also into other parts of the game. Um, don't just tell your player characters what they see in simple terms. Give them an idea what they're looking at. They don't just find a wagon. They find a wagon with a broken axle that's been ransacked and burned. They don't just see a column, they see a granite column that's 3 meters tall. They don't just see a tile floor. They see a broken and rough tile floor with potholes. Um, you know, they don't see a kobold. Describe what the kobold looks like. Don't just say, "Oh, you see a kobold," because you know what a kobold is. Well, no, they may know what a kobold is as a player. Maybe their character's never seen one. Maybe this is their first time on an adventure. They've never run into a goblin before. So, you know, uh, I always use the idea of a xenomorph. When you're describing a xenomorph coming up on a player, don't just say, okay, you've seen a xenomorph. Okay, well, because everybody at the table may have seen aliens and knows what a xenomorph looks like, but their character's never seen one. So describe a 6 to 7 foot tall, black green creature with a spear like tail and a head with no eyes that's drooling a translucent drool. And as it hisses, another small mouth comes out of its mouth as it approaches you. That's going to make your characters a lot more involved in the world. It's going to make them a lot more sold in the world. And if you're doing that, your descriptors are right and your descriptors are good, your players are going to ask the questions that should be asked. Taking the wagon example, if you say you find this burned out wagon with a broken axle on the side of the road that's been ransacked, now they're going to start saying, okay, we're going to go look at the part that's burned. What exactly does it look like? What does it feel like? What kind of stuff is still in the wagon? Is it fixable? Those kind of questions are going to come up. Does it look like the horses were stolen? You could just, if they ask those questions, you can get into bigger details. Oh yeah, it looks like the straps, the horses were cut. So they stole the horses. Um, you get into the ability to really get the players invested in the world. And like I said, the same thing is true. Again, it applies to combat very heavily because now, like I said, if you say, oh, you take 5 points of damage, you take a light wound, you take, your first wound in Savage Worlds, whatever, you take 2 points of strength in Traveler. That's not really telling them what's happening. That's telling them mechanically what's happening, and that's important, but it's also making it bland. It's not giving them the tool to understand what that looks like. Like I said, in Deadlands, you take a medium wound to the leg. Well, you're not just taking a medium wound to the leg. Now your leg is gushing blood and it's weak, and you feel like you can't put pressure on it. In D&D, you're not just taking a sword wound. You're not just taking a stab for 5 points of damage. You're taking a small dagger to the bicep, or a couple of rings of your chainmail might break off, or a strap might get cut as you twist to the side. And now you've got this image in your head as a player, and as a GM, you have an image in your head. Now your player's saying, "Oh crap, this is real." And this goes into something, just as a side note, that a lot of people don't know. Gygax actually posited, and several people have posited since, that hit points in D&D are not necessarily meant to represent just your constitution and ability to take damage. They represent a lot of things in the combat. They represent your ability to maneuver. They're representing your fatigue, your exhaustion, your ability to take damage, yes, but they're also representing other parts of it. So when you're taking hit points in D&D, for example, or any hit point based system, you're not just taking hit point damage. You're not just taking damage to your body. your armor's getting cut. Your armor's taking damage. You're getting worn out. You're getting worn down. Maybe the halberd that cuts across you doesn't cut you directly. It glances your neck and leaves a burning wound on your neck that now you're worried about. You're getting into the idea that your character is starting to understand that you are not just taking physical damage. You're slowing down. You're concerned about getting stabbed. You're especially in it can get even better if you're getting into like multi-combatants against one person. Let's say there's two bandits on a fighter. Well, now he's concerned because he's taken a blow from one, and how does he divide his attention? Those things are all important. They're all vital to playing out a D&D session, and they're making a world that feels alive. Because anybody can say the mechanical part. Not anybody can make the characters actually afraid of the combat, actually afraid of what can happen to them in the combat, afraid of what might happen to their character. Um, I personally am a big fan also of games where armor can be damaged. Rifts is a great example, or any Palladium game really. Combat can damage your armor. So the idea that you take a blow but you don't take hit point damage is not just, okay, well, he misses, or he hits you and your armor absorbs it, whatever. It's you take a shot to your armor and now there's a small hole burned in it, or the sword cut away your straps, or there's now a big gash in your armor, or your helmet is dented. Now you have a more realistic view of what the world looks like, how dangerous the world is. You're not just dealing with the simplistic part of combat. You're dealing with a moving, dynamic item in the game. And so if you're really describing combat properly, you're giving your characters more than just the mechanics. You're giving the characters something to think about. And like I said, and then what you normally want to do is you can go as descriptive as you feel like you need to go, or as non-descriptive as you need to go, but always should end, of course, with the mechanics of it. Okay, you dodge out of the way of that halberd and cuts the side of your neck. You take 4 points of damage from the halberd. Okay, now you've got the mechanics, you've got a reality, and you've got a player needing to think about how he's going to react to having been hit. And what does that look like? And then you can also, one of the other cool things with that is you can get the players involved in it too by getting them to describe what it looks like when they're stabbing people. One of the things I do personally is I always allow my players to describe a killing blow. If you kill an NPC or a monster, what does it look like when you kill them? You don't have to be super descriptive as a player. Some players are not comfortable with it all the time. In Deadlands, you shoot an hombre, and that, and you kill him. Tell me what it looks like. Well, you hit him in the noggin. What does it look like when you shoot him? What does it look like when you kill the goblin? What does it look like when the wizard drops? What does that look like to you? Don't just say, "Well, I killed him." Well, yeah, you did, but you killed him. But what does it look like? What should be the impression on other NPCs, on other PCs, everybody? Everybody should get an impression for what your character's capable of. If you're a fighter and you slay another character in an arena, you know, you should be able to, the crowd should get a cheer out of what you do. Um, Instead of just saying, well, I did 15 points of damage, he's dead. Yeah, okay, he is. But what does that 15 points of damage look like? What did you do to drop him? What did the final thrust look like? What did the final slash look like? What did the final bludgeon look like? And uh, better yet, if you can find the copies of the critical tables from Rollmaster, don't have to use them in your game, but certainly would encourage you, if you've never read them, read them. Those descriptors are amazing. Some of them are funny, but they're mostly amazing. They do a great job of really impactfully telling you what the blow is capable of doing. You don't just hit him in the leg and hurt him with a critical to the leg with a mace. You break his kneecap, and now he's slower and unable to make move and maneuvers. You shoot him through the ear with an arrow. Those are the kind of things that are on that table, and it really encourages you to be creative like that, and be creative when you're role playing. If a character gets a critical on a monster, don't just say, "Well, you critical for double damage." You really hurt the guy. Describe it. Maybe you take a finger off. Maybe you take part of his hand with you. There's a lot of things you can do, and make the combat pop, make the world pop, make the game seem real. to the players. And if you do that, I promise you guys, if you follow this little core of this, which is make the world pop, you will find your games to be infinitely more dynamic and fun. And players will be more sold on the world, more sold on things. Um, Although I will say this as well, guys, there's going to come things that you don't have to describe in some types of games. You don't have to describe as much because some things are common sense. Using Call of Cthulhu as an example, um, if you're standing on a sidewalk getting ready to cross the street and a Model T comes around for some reason around the corner and almost hits you, you can simply say, well, Model T comes around the corner and almost hits you. Most people have an idea of what a Model T looks like, and if they don't, they can always look it up online. Um, it's readily available. So there's no need to get into this idea of being you don't have to be so super descriptive that it stalls the game, but you should be descriptive enough to where the players feel like the world is real, like what they're going through as a character is real. Because if your characters feel it, then you're not looking at your sheet every 5 minutes. You're not trying to figure out how to game the system. You're just playing your character. You're just playing the fighter. You're just playing the private detective. You're playing the gunslinger in Deadlands. You're playing the pilot in Star Wars. That's what you're doing. You're not just playing a character sheet. Um, and if I can give you guys a piece of advice, Vindicta RPG just put out a video called "Your Character Sheet is Not a Controller," and I would encourage you to check that video out. I can link it here in the description. He's very much right. Your character sheet is not a controller. Play the character as you envision the character. Don't play a character based on the stats. Well, I have an 18 strength, so I must be able to swing a sword really hard. Yes, you can. Absolutely. But why do you have an 18 strength? Describe what that 18 strength looks like. Describe what it does when he busts down a door. Describe what it looks like when he cuts down an enemy. Describe what it looks like when he picks up a two-handed sword. You know, how does he stand? What does does he scream in combat? Does he have a battle cry? Those kind of things are all important. And if you do those things, said guys, I promise your games will pop. You will have so much more fun and the world will feel more real, and you will not be disappointed if you follow that little nugget there. Anyways, guys, thoughts, comments, questions, concerns below. As always, I'm happy to address them. Always follow the 3 rules: no ad hominems, no picking fights, no leave me college dissertations. I don't have time for them. Other than that, guys, I hope you guys keep having fun, and we do hope to see you guys around the game table at some point.